Welcome and thank you for joining the launch of Sites of Fracture, Diasporic Imaginings of Occupied Artsakh. Thank you, artists who are participating in the exhibit and this discussion. Thank you to all the attendees, and a big thank you to our colleagues at the library who worked so hard to make this event happen. A special thank you to our co-curator, artist, scholar, and cultural worker, Dr. Mashinka Hakopian, who couldn't join us today due to a family emergency. She has been an inspiration and dynamo since our initial conversations of Sites of Fracture a few weeks, months ago. Allow me to tell you a little bit about Reflect Space Gallery. For years, the Armenian American community had beseeched the city of Glendale to provide a public space for discourse about mass atrocities like the Armenian genocide. After a major renovation of the Central Library in 2017, the city granted this request, and the Reflect Space Gallery was born, dedicated to social justice issues where art, archive, and the witness narrative are woven together and presented as exhibits. Since the reopening of the reimagined and beautifully renovated library, we've had over 20 exhibits, including about the Armenian genocide, the Native American genocide, the Holocaust, the mass industrial prison complex, the US-Mexican border and immigration, body politics of the LGBTQIA+ community, Japanese internment, comfort women and human trafficking, as well as Reckoning, a major virtual exhibition about Glendale's racist past, which is still on view on the website. We strive to give our audience an immersive and inclusive space where viewers are invited to learn about and interrogate difficult topics like displacement and violence in society, affecting us both in our local communities as well as the global community at large. About Reflect Space and what we do. And again, thank you everyone for joining. And I'd like to pass it on to Ada, our co-curator of Reflect Space.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Anahid, for the introduction. I'm co-curator of Reflect Space. I'm very privileged to be in this capacity to be showing the kind of artists that we show, of typically narratives that are not heard. And every spring, we have an opportunity to present an exhibition about Armenian issues. And as we were experiencing the war and spring was coming up, we as curators we felt incumbent upon us to address the Artsakh war in some way. As we were discussing the issue with Mashinka and Anahid and myself, we felt that if we didn't do that, we would not be doing our community the service that we as Reflect Space were created to do. So in case you were not aware, in the end of last year, the Independent Republic of Artsakh, which Armenians have been living in Artsakh, indigenous Armenians for over 3 millennia, who had decolonized their territory in the late 90s, were attacked again in the end of last year and recolonized by Azerbaijan. So it's a very, very visceral and very important topic for our community, and we really wanted to address it. And so we knew some artists had already addressed that issue. For instance, Kamee Abrahamian had done some public artwork. She Loves Collective had done a performance downtown. And then we reached out to a number of other artists to see if they had also responses to the war that we could bring together. And we were very fortunate to find a number of artists who did that. And we wanted to also we wanted to focus on diasporic responses, because we felt that as Armenians and cultural workers in the diaspora, we had that distance does not allow us to properly contextualize what was happening in Armenia in the immediate aftermath or during the war, that visceral response, we didn't think we were the right people to contextualize that. So we wanted to find diasporic responses. And we really focused on work that was thoughtful and reflective and asked questions, works that considered the issue from multiple perspectives, work that straddled the line between this outrage that we all felt and the effort to imagine a new future for Artsakh. All the artists engaged in this difficult yet necessary cultural work to think about, to respond to, and to really try to create new narratives that counter the erasure that accompanies colonization that's happening now. We have photography, we have film, we have 3D models, public art, sound art in the exhibition. We urge you to take your time to explore it at length. And before we begin, we want to show you a quick trailer, a quick introductory video about the exhibition.
Glendale Library Arts and Culture's Reflect Space Gallery presents Sites of Fracture, Diasporic Imaginings of Occupied Artsakh, a virtual exhibition that brings together diasporan Armenian artists from the United States, Canada, and Germany to build collective counter-narratives to the forces of occupation and cultural erasure in the Republic of Artsakh.
Sareri Kamee Vortegից ես գալիս եւ ուր ես շտապում անհանգիստ ու ախորն իմ սարերի Kamee.
During the invasion of Artsakh in 2020, the global Armenian diaspora was gripped by the collective trauma of watching a campaign of ethnic cleansing and colonization unfold on digital screens and social media. As indigenous Armenian heritage faced systemic destruction, diasporan Armenian artists responded with projects that countered the attempted erasure of Armenian identities and histories. The artists and cultural workers in this exhibition are Kamee Abrahamian, Ali Kat of Entangled Roots Press, Silvina Mekertichyan, Naré Mkrtchyan, Nelli Sargsyan, She Loves Collective, Scout to Funkjan, Anahid Yahjian, and Yerazad Coalition. Sites of Fracture, co-curated by Mashinka Hakopian, Oshagan, and Anahid Oshagan, gestures towards the repatriation of ancestral lands. The virtual exhibition takes place in the photographically reconstructed fortress of the city of Shushi, Artsakh's historical cultural capital, now occupied by Azerbaijan. Sites of Fracture imagines a decolonized Shushi and an independent Republic of Artsakh.
And now back to Anahid.
Thank you. Wow. Every time I visit that site, I get really emotional, as I just did right now. With that, I wanted to invite now our artists, our esteemed artists who are with us. Unfortunately, due to some unforeseen event, Kamee Abrahamian has not yet had an opportunity to join us. So I'd like to invite our artists in alphabetical order. We'll begin with Carene, Mekertichyan, who will, and all the other artists will give a brief introduction about themselves and go right into following the question or the prompt for this evening's discussion. And the prompt is, as diasporan cultural workers, how do we intervene in crises at a distance? And I'd like each artist, starting with Carene, to respond to that question. Carene?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Carene Mekertichyan, and I'm an artist, activist, educator, and the co-founder of Yerazad Coalition. And so on the question of how do we as culture workers intervene at a distance, I want to start by asserting and holding space for the truth that it is difficult and challenging work being diasporan in these moments of crisis. And we always have these questions of whether or not we are doing enough, or if we truly have a say in what is happening in the homeland. And I just want to complicate that even further by taking an intersectional approach and understanding that being in the diaspora, naturally, there's an increase in diversity and intersectional identity within our community. So I want us to also think about how marginalized Armenians feel comfortable intervening at a distance when they are oftentimes part of a diasporan community that does not necessarily value their input or perspective, and in some cases, frankly, their existence. So how do we intervene and show up for our community when at times our safety as marginalized Armenians can be challenged in these spaces? So I want to keep this brief, but to start off, I think the core solution to this is that we in the Armenian diaspora must make sure that we are holding space for all Armenians to feel comfortable engaging in these issues. We cannot have any more cultural gatekeeping. You know, it seems like it should be obvious, but we are still having these debates even today. Literally today, there are arguments happening about whether or not mixed race Armenians or LGBTQ plus Armenians are somehow a threat to our community's existence. And so instead of this destructive and reactionary behavior, we really need to use these intersectional identities and the space we occupy in the diaspora to our advantage, because these intersectional identities give us access to more communities, which in turn allows us to reach more people and garner more support for our cause. Diasporan Armenians really need to stop being so insular because it is harmful for our own cause. And I understand that this mindset can come from our trauma and erasure, but some of it also just comes from straight up bigotry and ignorance and an adherence to this model minority myth and the need to maintain our proximity to whiteness. So I want us to make sure that we are genuinely showing up for other marginalized communities and using the power of education and coalition building to move forward. That's all.
Naré, Naré's in Armenia. It's very early for her, but she's been gracious enough to join us at 4:15 in the morning. Thank you, Naré. Thank you so much for being here.
It's so wonderful being here with you all. It's especially joining from Armenia. So my name is Naré Mkrtchyan. I'm a director and producer. I produced over 60 projects. My last film was with Netflix, but the one that is very close to my heart is about Armenian genocide, and became the only Armenian genocide film to be shortlisted for Oscar. The film is called The Other Side of Home, which I made in order to find healing for myself. And here I am again, back in Armenia, because of the trauma that has been triggered so badly during this war. I love the question that you're asking. For me, I think it is to respond to destruction with creation and to try and wake up human hearts in the moment of crisis with what we're making. But also, I feel like as diasporan Armenians, as being in America during the war, it was so incredibly difficult for me at some points to even be able to be creative, because there was a constant conflict between my internal world and my external world, because I feel like the external world was all sleek and shiny America, while inside of me there was chaos and war. but yet I took this juxtaposition of feelings, and now I'm pretty much making a film about this. But in another way, my response was also coming to Armenia. So I guess in a strange way, I cheated and I didn't just intervene from distance, but here I am in Armenia.
That's a way of intervening. Thank you so much, Naré. We'll now move on to Nelli, who is Nelli Sargsyan from Vermont. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, dear Anahid and Ara. Thank you for including me in your project. So, as you already said, my name is Nelli Sargsyan, and I'm an anthropologist and educator and interested in forms of collective care and feminist world-making projects. So as I reflect on the question that you posed us, I locate myself in Abenaki homeland in a settler colonial state, itself haunted by the ghosts of the trade in human flesh and genocide of the native peoples of these lands, where most of us are variously situated guests, which is a polite word that shouldn't let us forget to contend with being settlers, if differently immigrants. So I ask myself, are we gracious and caring guests if uninvited? Have we naturalized to this land in a way that honors its animate nature and knowledge? How do we divest from the violences of this settler colonial state and others? It looks like we all safely made home, and stayed alive in our homes, but not all our fellow humans in this country have been so lucky. Certainly not our Black kinfolk or Native American women sisters. So I ask myself, are we attuned to their pain, or that of immigrant and diasporic kinfolk like our Kurdish and Palestinian and Kashmiri and Syrian and Iranian and Sikh and Chinese siblings, just to name a few, with whom we share many years as homes in this tethered rather than united states, all of us differently affected by settler colonial violence, even if we don't share the many theirs of each other's homes. Do we intervene in the crisis in the many years of these tethered states? When we intervene in crisis in immediate years and in distant theirs to which we have affective attachments, I hope that we do so in ways that sustain life with humility, without hierarchizing suffering, willing to stand, sit, and breathe corrected by people with whom we stand, people directly affected by the monstrosities of these various crises. That we intervene in a way that instead of death-making interventions of having each other's heads on sticks, helmets on walls, knees or boots on necks, we raise each other up in the here and in the there, in a way that allows us to tap into each other's humanity, to sustain each other and not to extract life or hold each other's lives hostage, to wail together for each other's losses, to rejoice for each other's joys, and to heal from all the violences of the multiple long-term ongoing death-making crises. As palimpsestic as our collective traumas of genocide and massacres and earthquakes and wars are, alongside their ghosts haunting us, I hope that we intervene in ways that contribute to our collective healing, rather than reactivate the traumas caused by death-making, that freeze our memory of what it means to live or have commitments to life-making. Can we intervene like the compost I, you, we, they put in my, your, our, their gardens, that makes the resurgence of renewed and healing life ongoing? What a world would that be? Would we recognize our collective selves if and when we are healed? I also wonder, what would it feel like to be a healed people? to spend as much time honoring life and our living as we spend honoring death and our dead. The songs we will sing, the dances we will dance, the laughs we will share, the kefs we will have. If we can be like compost and nourish the regeneration of life, perhaps we can glean a flicker of that world that I'm dreaming. Can we be like compost? So here's something that is composty to me, and I also hope you find composty. Yesaren gukai dondura batir zera totadarar al kharirati vay 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 varvumem vay 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 halvumem halvum varvumem yes mi chortarei dum garnanare kosi Artsakh getav in jugnudev vay 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 varvumem vay 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 halvumem halvum varvumem. Thank you.
Wow, that was so profoundly beautiful. If we didn't have all the states between Vermont and California, I'd run over and hug you right now. But I'm going to give you a virtual hug. That was truly beautiful. And as we watch the trailer and the exhibit, we're also haunted by the echoing of the voice of the fortress at Shushi, and the millennia of the voices that have been there and are continuing there. It's so profoundly beautiful. Thank you. I think we all need a breath after that. We need to take a moment and absorb it and not listen to me. Thank you so much, Nelli Jan. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Anahid Yahjian, our other illustrious participant, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and then answering the question, as diasporan cultural workers, how do we intervene in crises at a distance?
Well, I'm sorry I was a little late to the meeting. The Los Angeles traffic was true to form today. I look forward to revisiting what everyone else shared prior to me. You guys are moving quick today, but I'm glad I caught the last part of Nelli's presentation. My answer to the question is very simple, and the answer is that I don't know. I'm not sure if that was said already, but I'm one of those people who went to Armenia, lived there for several years, tried to figure it out. I felt like I couldn't figure it out while I was there, and I certainly have felt even more helpless and disconnected from a distance. And I think that's something that anyone living in exile can relate to. But I do think that going to Armenia ultimately was better than just staying here. And that's something that not everyone is able to do for different reasons. But for those who can, I think that's the only solution I've ever been able to offer to anybody who's ever come to me and said, how can I be more connected to the things happening over there? The only answer I've ever been able to give is really, I think you just need to go there if you can. But I think there's been a valiant effort made from a distance, from here, from afar, to try and intervene, to try and speak up, to try and say something. And I don't mean to invalidate any of that. It's just, for me personally, I don't know how much of that is making it there in a way that's actually intervening. And I used to have dreams of rising up the ranks and being part of the leadership of Armenia, which I think ultimately wasn't for me, but I wonder sometimes if that's the best way, is to become part of the machine. But these are just some ideas and not anything certain that I can offer. But I can say with certainty, you should go. You should go to the place that you're talking about. You should go to the place that you're fighting for. It will greatly amplify the power of anything you're trying to say from here.
Thank you, everybody, for your very thoughtful and emotional and deep responses. So there's a couple of things that came up in your responses. One is this collectivity, a collective kind of connection that I think a lot of us are looking for. It isn't just us Armenians dealing with our own pain, but really trying to connect to a wider audience, other marginalized groups, transferring kind of the issues we have to where we live, I think, which is really, really critical. So I think that's part of this. I think the word collective healing is kind of the thing that speaks to that. Part of the work and the response that you had. The other one is definitely helplessness here. Distance, the intervention at distance also creates this helplessness that you feel that whatever you're doing, perhaps your audience is really back here in the diaspora. And so you're really talking kind of to your own circle and a wide circle, but trying to create this intervention in your own lives and your own communities here. And the question that I want to put to you, when we do this, we have this I have this difficulty coming from an artistic position to separate the art that I want to make, the kind of work that I want to make that connects to these other communities and speaks to a universal kind of narrative, and the emotional connection, the very, very strong, emotionally intense kind of connection that we have and what we feel. Not only do we feel to the land, that when we go there, right, we have this undefined kind of connection, magnetism to place. I think Anahid speaks about that, and Naré speaks about place a lot also in their work. And so how do you live between these two things, the need to make work that will connect to a larger universal audience, and this very visceral and very emotional kind of issue that this is for all of us? Maybe, perhaps this is not a conflict for you, but perhaps it is. And so I want to put that question to you. And we can start as we started. Anahid, please. Whoever wants to go jump in, please, Anahid.
I have a response. Yeah, I actually was one of the best parts. So I made my film Hishe for this exhibition. It was a project that I'd been incubating for about 8 years, or not 8-9 years, but the actual making of what I contributed to the exhibit was done for the exhibit. And so the framework of the exhibition freed me from what I cope with constantly as a filmmaker, which is how can I make sure my work is universally relatable, universally clear, everybody can understand it. When it comes to Armenian topics, that's always a very tough position to be in because it feels like I have to spend a bunch of time reviewing history before I can get to my point. And so making Hishe for this event was incredible because I let that go completely. I said, hopefully in the context of the other work in this show and boosted by the framework provided by the curation team, whoever comes to see this will get it, or maybe they'll be intrigued and they'll go home and Wikipedia everything. But I'm not going to make it into a historical overview or like a preamble before I get to the actual art. And so that was something that I loved when I lived in Armenia, was making work that wasn't worried about explaining Armenianness to other people because the context was already Armenian, and that was a really mind-blowing experience for me as a diasporan. And so it's been really special to have experienced that same thing while being in Los Angeles. So that's what I have to say about that. So thank you for making that possible.
We're so grateful that you grappled with it for so long and you came up with this amazing final product of Hishe, which means remember in Armenian, and as a contribution to Sites of Fracture, because it's truly very powerful and very poetic. And I think it fits in so amazingly, beautifully under the umbrella of Sites of Fracture.
Thank you. And I think it's really special that Glendale would be specifically a place that would be open to a piece of work that it's really cool to know that there's a place in America where Armenians, but also non-Armenians, know enough of the context where I can just say what I have to say in a way that I wouldn't be able to say anywhere else. So for however long our community has a presence here, I'm really grateful to have that feeling, because especially with this pandemic, it's very hard to go there, to go to the place. So thank you, Glendale, for being my little Armenia.
Thank you for the shout out to Glendale. We appreciate it.
Anyone else would like to respond? Any of the other artists?
Yeah, I can respond.
Please.
I think for me, being a Black and Armenian woman, the idea of explaining things and going into background for people is something that I usually run towards. I don't usually have as much of a problem explaining because I understand, and I think it's important for us to understand that there is a knowledge gap with the general population due to what we are taught in our schools and this whole system. So I'm always open to being that person to explain things and to go into a little bit of detail, or at least to provide context for people so that they understand. But at the end of the day, I feel like when we are talking about these oppressive systems and genocide and colonialism, that's a very universal topic that a lot of marginalized communities are currently experiencing, have experienced as well. So I always appreciate when people see art or hear a poem or a piece that I wrote, or look at Yerazad Coalition's piece that we added to this wonderful exhibit as well. And when I have non-Armenian acquaintances who are still moved, or they make connections to their own community and their own background, I think that's really what it's about. Is sometimes it's just about putting your own experience and truth out there, and then seeing others make those connections, and then having more conversations and after the fact, and really showing up for each other once we see that there's really truly so much common ground between us. So I really appreciated that there was such a wide range of pieces and a wide range of explanation, and then some things that were just there, and people can, you know, choose to educate themselves further if they would like. But I really appreciated that part of it as well.
Anyone else like to respond? It's not necessary that you respond. We could move on if not.
You know, it's interesting.
Please, Naré. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Anahid. Please. What is interesting? Tell us.
I want you to have an opportunity to respond before I do.
Okay. I think for me, it was very interesting this time being in Armenia and Artsakh, experiencing all of this as an observer. And for example, I remember I went to Ganzasar in Artsakh, and we have Ganzasar, but it was such an emotional experience for me to be there and to look at this incredible church, the letters, but not as an Armenian, but more than an Armenian. Somebody just being part of the human race and seeing this beautiful culture that is on our planet right now, and that some people are trying to destroy. And it was just such a heavy experience for me, just witnessing it as an observer, because throughout the whole war, that was the most painful thing for me, not only what we're doing to what is happening to Artsakh, but what is happening to the land, what we're doing to our planet, what we're doing to one another as a human race. So that was my experience with this war and with the whole situation in Artsakh. So yeah, I'm being an observer more this time.
It's interesting because we're observers and we're part of the, I think it was Carene who mentioned that the universalness of colonialism and people understanding or knowing what it's all about. And I dealt with something that was really deeply personal, and I've been affected by it. And it was a comment by a friend, a colleague, a non-Armenian, an artist, a teacher, an educator, who said, I really don't understand why people are so connected to the land. Why do we have to have this war? Why do they care? Why can't if they wanted my home, I would just, give them and move on. I don't need that place. We don't need to have this. And there are so many different levels to her expression of how she was feeling, how her frustration. And where I was coming from was, wow, I was thinking that's coming from such a place of privilege and non-understanding. And yet the other level is, I am also on occupied land right here in Glendale. And there's got to be a recognition for that. Yet I have this very strong and strong connection to what is happening thousands and thousands of miles away in Artsakh. How do I reconcile with my trauma, my frustration, my anger of what's happening in Artsakh, in the recolonialization of Artsakh there, and yet I'm here on occupied land myself. Really, really grappling with a lot of things. How do we reconcile these differences, these emotions that are underlying really counter to one another?
If Nelly, did you want to respond also, or we could move on? And I wanted to mention very quickly that we will have hopefully a little bit of time for questions from the audience, and feel free to put questions in the chat on the Zoom, the YouTube channel, and we will see if we can get to them and answer them.
I'm not sure that I'm adding much to what has already been said, but I guess, when I was writing about what, diasporic Armenian belonging and things like that, I would oftentimes get this comment, but like, what's so special about the Armenian diaspora, or why? It's, the questions were always about, they landed on me always in the same vein that prove to us the deservedness of Armenian diasporic belonging, that it's something that's different from other diasporic belongings, or there's something special for it. And I have been thinking about this question of deservedness. Like, you have to why is it not enough to just be human and be, your life be precious, or not human, just alive? Why being alive is not enough for care? You have to have credentials, you have to have things built and associated with your name, and that gives you credentials, and then someone tries to erase that and take your credentials away. So I guess what I find significant in the connecting to the emotional and visceral is just self-narration, instead of entering into a dynamic where I need to prove that there is something valuable in me, in my people, for you to pay attention, wider audiences. I think I'm kind of done with that. I'm not interested in that at all. Right now, I'm just more interested in self-narration and imagining worlds that are multi-ethnic. I'm also done with trauma that nationalism causes by continuously keeping our collective trauma active. So that's what I'm interested in. And so and no matter what experiences you have, I don't need to have experienced all the suffering and the joys in someone to be able to connect to them. I might not understand everything and still be able to connect and see our different experiences as strengths and richness. So that's what I'm, more interested in. Looking for more connections, because indigenous ways of thinking and being and living can be so of these lands, of this continent, can be so resonant with me, even though I did not grow up in those life ways, but they are life sustaining. So I guess I find connection in ways that are life sustaining, and I just want to live and think and feel in ways that really lives this idea that every life is precious. So in my whether it's interpersonal relationship, whether it's something that I sing or write or contemplate or I teach, but that's my interest, to cultivate and to feel in my body, and to work with that and toward that every life is precious.
Thank you, Nelli. So we're going to have a few minutes here, because this is a virtual exhibition. The artists have not met each other. Some of them do not know each other. They've never seen each other and will not see each other probably during this exhibition. We want to give a chance if there are any questions between the artists about the work, about the response. If not, then we'll go to if anyone have any questions from the audience. So I'll open the floor for that, for a little bit of perhaps discussion, interaction between us as a community of artists and cultural workers.
I'm eager to hear from the audience if there are questions. So I don't want to skip ahead, but personally, I will abstain from this section.
I have a question to the artists. I wanted to ask you, how do you deal with the pain? How do you create in the immense pain?
I can start. I think for me personally, as someone who's also, I do my own writing, and I find that writing, whenever I'm going through, like when we were experiencing what we were experiencing this summer and fall, I find that it's incredibly healing to just get whatever I need out of my body and onto either paper or in an image. Because for me, holding on to all of that toxicity and pain, it is very detrimental and heavy. And it's still heavy even after I get things out. But I've always found that that's the most healing thing that I can do. And then if I have the opportunity to share the work that I come up with other artists or other people in my community, I've always found that that sort of collective sharing of grief and understanding is incredibly healing. And it really, once again, reminds us that we're all connected. We are all of our communities are experiencing traumas in certain ways and have different generational traumas as well. So it makes us feel less alone. I feel like that's another thing that happens a lot within the Armenian community. It becomes a sort of oppression Olympics where we're the only ones who've experienced this. No one has experienced what we've experienced. No one cares about what we've experienced. And I always say, well, you'd be surprised if you actually reached out to other people and shared. And again, that's something that comes from generations of us feeling unseen and erased, and it's very understandable. But for me, it's always kind of getting things out and sharing them with a collective and community.
For me, it has also been about being with others, and I just found, I think, Naré, you were speaking about this, the internal turmoil and the enormity of the pain or experience. And then outwardly, people around you are living different life or reality, or at least that's what I heard, but it's very similar to my experience too. So that was very difficult. So connecting to other Armenians who were experiencing this was helpful, and in a group, but then also just individually, both those who were in here in the US, but also my friends in Armenia. It was also because of that experience, I also felt a need to connect to, for example, to Kurdish and Palestinian and Kashmiri feminists. So a colleague of mine and I were able to connect to some Palestinian and Kashmiri feminists, and that was helpful. So we have different struggles, but like Carene, you were saying, I also strongly feel about the interconnectedness of the struggles, and we don't have to experience them exactly the same way to be able to, be together. And also walking and, touching the soil and being in the woods. I live in southern Vermont, so I have access to those kinds of things. And my children, being with my children. But of course, it was also bittersweet because every time I was with my children, I was just thinking about the children whose parents lost, their children that, could have been my children too. So Yeah.
Thank you, Nelli. So we have one question from the audience. We have a few minutes here. We can address it if somebody wants to address it. Then the question is, what is art's role in the diaspora to spread the word about the Armenian cause? And clearly, you know, though that what the Armenian cause is has perhaps multiple different viewpoints and definitions, but I will allow whoever wants to speak about that from your perspective, please.
I'll go. I actually spent my teenage years trying to represent for the Armenian cause in the way that, in the kind of nationalistic sense that phrase can be defined. I guess you could argue that it has many definitions, but for me, the Armenian cause I associate very specifically with this idea of Haitad, which was a ideology that a lot of us in the diaspora were raised with. And I actually found it to be very limiting in my art making. And I think that my work got better when I let go of that. There's a certain exclusivity to that nationalistic kind of Armenian cause that I think really limits creativity. And I think, to echo back to Nelli and actually everybody's statements, it's more about the human cause. I think when you start to think more about the human cause, then you can find ways to weave the Armenian thread of it into that greater fabric. And I think it makes the art stronger, and it speaks to, it has a greater chance of speaking to larger themes that may or may not educate somebody, but at least get your message across beyond your usual group of, Armenian community members, which I know is the big insecurity we have, which is, as it's been mentioned, that nobody other than Armenians cares about us. And I think letting go of that insecurity and just making art anyway, as Nelli said, in a personal way, is actually what makes people gravitate toward you, because you're not trying to necessarily make it into a lesson. So personally, I think letting go of the Armenian cause is what made my art more impactful.
If nobody else would like to respond to that, I'd like to very quickly mention, this was mentioned, but we didn't talk about it, the framework of the exhibition, the fact that it takes place in Shushi, at the fort of Shushi. For one thing, it's a virtual exhibition can take place anywhere. There's no reason for it to be in a gallery. And so we selected this space to have this exhibition as a gesture, as we said earlier, a gesture of repatriation of land. But also, I want to mention that it comes from this idea from Naré Mkrtchyan, the great curator and thinker, who created an art organization and a whole movement to actually do exhibitions in Shushi on that fort. And so it was inspired from that attempt 20 years ago almost to create art in Shushi, to situate cultural workers and artifacts and artwork in that space and invite international artists to be in that space. And I think, for instance, if that project had succeeded, perhaps things may have been different in terms of the response from at least the artistic world to Shushi and the colonization that happened. I know things would not have been any different physically on the ground, but at least the response we would have been able to create some bridges that this group has been talking about, create allies across the world to respond to this. So on that note, there's one more question that from the audience that we could ask. We don't have that much time, but let's see who wants to answer this one. What is the role for art to help build bridges? In fact, we're talking about bridges with other communities, even perhaps with progressives in Turkey. So I know there's a little bit of a back history. In 2015, there were some openings, 2015, 2016 in Turkey, and some artists had relationships with Turkish progressives and Turkish artists. Anybody want to respond to that possibility? Carene, please.
Yeah, I can touch on that a little bit. I think it's really important, and I guess this sort of touches on the last question as well, to understand that art is incredibly powerful. It's an incredibly powerful way of sparking empathy between people and bringing about important conversations. And a lot of times it can create a sort of waterfall effect that leads to actual systemic changes. So I think art is a really powerful way of bridging gaps. And I know this is a conversation that can be very controversial within the Armenian community, but we do need to understand the difference between oppressive governments and neo-fascist pan-Turkism, and the fact that there are people in Turkey who are not inherently immediately against all Armenians and who don't recognize the genocide. It is majority of the population, but there are, as you said, there are progressives who are open and who are aware and who acknowledge history. And oftentimes they are left out of the conversation within all of this sort of nationalism that we talk about. I know just today I saw a statistic that 1/3 of Turkish youth recognizes the Armenian genocide. We also tend to leave out of the conversation all of the Armenians who are in Turkey, whose families have been through the unimaginable, who have had to maybe change their last name. I want our community to sort of get out of the idea that they don't count or they're not Armenian or we cannot bridge these gaps ever in the future. I think that is something we should be working towards because we have to eventually. We have to hope that there can be recognition and then reparations from the Turkish government. That only will happen if we start bridging these gaps. We're starting to talk about reparations, but people don't really understand what will go into that. And it's bridging these gaps and trying to coexist eventually.
Well, we have 1 minute left, and I'm going to hand it over to Anahid Oshagan to wrap it up for us.
Well, thank you everyone for your amazing contributions, both today here as well as on the Reflect Space website and the virtual exhibit. It's been a really enlightening conversation, and we're so thrilled that you were able to be a part of it from, all over the place. So truly grateful for your attendance. Thank you. I'd also like to shift your focus and attention to yet another event that's actually taking place right after this one, and that you can find with the Armenian American Action Network. And it's also a virtual event, and it's called We Will Not Be Erased. And it's a virtual community gathering in honor of US recognition, or the US Armenian genocide recognition and the fight ahead. So check out Instagram, Facebook, I'm sure, and there's a registration, but I'm sure you'll be able to hop onto that as well. And the conversations continue. So thank you everyone who attended, watched, and you'll have an opportunity to go hop onto YouTube and see it if anyone wasn't able to join us today live. Again, thank you all and good night.
Thank you, Anahid.